So page 206 on the comprehension page is question number 8. You should have everything else done all the way up to question number 8. So question 8 says, how did the expansion of railroads in Minnesota impact the state's population growth? So as we are looking at how the railroads expanded throughout our state, as the railroads got bigger, our population gets bigger, and we're going to see why.
The railroad, friend or foe? Lincoln County was not the only place in Minnesota that changed once the trains came. Railroads transformed the entire state, especially the western part. In 1860, Minnesota had no railroads. 20 years later, more than 3,000 miles of track crisscrossed the state. During the same 20-year period, the state's population grew from 172,000 to 780,000. The growth of both railroad lines and the population was not a coincidence. The railroads helped attract immigrants and encouraged settlement. They carried settlers and goods westward. Railroad companies also sent recruiting agents to Europe to sing Minnesota's praises and encourage people to immigrate there.
So if we look at our maps, you can see this one had, a few railroads going up and out. Not a ton, but the railroads were just coming. Then this was in 1870. 10 years later, look at how many railroads we have. And now people were able to get way out to the western parts of Minnesota. So it was able to spread so much farther. So how did that impact going from 172,000 people to 780,000? That's a huge difference. Lots of people came in. So what was it that made, as the railroads got bigger, our population got bigger?
The railroads attract settlers. Without the railroads, it might have been hard to convince people to settle in places like Lincoln County. The land of western Minnesota was good for farming, but it wasn't very easy to reach. Only a few of the rivers could handle boat traffic, and roads were even fewer. Western Minnesota needed railroads to attract settlers, and building railroads was very expensive. The question was how to attract the railroads.
So we know that the more railroads we get, the more the population grows. Well, how did we get railroads here in Minnesota? Right, so we want the people because we want our state to be big and growing. We know railroads are going to help us get more people. So now listen to what they did to get the railroads to come.
The federal government's answer was to give the railroad companies millions of acres of land in western and southern Minnesota. The companies sold some of the land and used the income they earned to pay for the construction of their railroad lines. Railroad land was popular among settlers. The closer people lived to a railroad, the easier it was to send their crops east and to visit friends and relatives in nearby towns. This system worked well for the railroads, too. Not only did they make money on land sales, but they also made sure there would be new customers along the line.
So what did Minnesota have a lot of? Wheat. We were growing wheat, but what did we have? Land. Right? We had lots of land. They got all that land. The Dakota, after the war, got kicked out of Minnesota. They were exiled. So all the Dakota reservation land was now all Minnesota land. So Minnesota owned it. They were able to sell land to the railroads, because that's what the railroads need to make their tracks. They sold them extra, they gave them extra land. So the railroads could sell that land to make the money to build the tracks. The railroads knew that people wanted that land. It was popular land. So if you were a land speculator, that would be the land you would want to buy because you'd be able to sell it. People wanted to live by railroads because of the transportation it provided, for them to get around, for them to put their crops on, to be able to sell farther away. So that land was worth a lot. So the railroads were making money. Railroads were also knew that these farmers coming in buying that land would be their customers, paying prices for them to transport their products. So at first, everything is great. Everybody's excited about the railroad. More people coming in. Ooh, it's all wonderful. But things change. Here it says the railroad regulation begins. We're going to find out why we needed to have regulations, why we needed to control some of the railroads. Question 9 says, why did the Grangers campaign for railroad regulations? So that makes me ask the question, who remembers what the Grange was? We learned about this before break. Robbie?
Wasn't it like a town meeting?
Not quite a town meeting. It was like a farmers association. The farmers would all get together, and that was their time to socialize. That was their time to talk about concerns. Hey, those grasshoppers were eating up all my crops. What did you do to stop the grasshoppers from eating your crops? What kind of techniques are you using? I see you grew tons of corn this year. What did you do differently? What are some things I could learn from you? So remember, the Grange was where these farmers came together to share their concerns, to talk about things, to help one another. And then we heard, when we were talking about the Grange at the end, all of a sudden it started to turn political because of the railroad. So we're going to find out how the Grange helped the farmers with the railroad.
Railroad regulation begins. At first, almost everybody seemed happy with this arrangement. Then feelings began to change. The railroads raised their prices for shipping and storing crops, pocketing up to 1/3 of the money that wheat farmers received when they sold their grain. To make matters worse, some of the company's inspectors cheated the farmers. These inspectors would tell farmers that their grain wasn't worth as much as it really was. The farmers didn't like what was happening, but what could they do about it?
So, we would like to think that people are out there helping one another, doing good for each other, looking out, practicing Catholic social teaching, looking out for the rights and responsibilities, and taking care of our neighbors. But is that always the case? Because we're human, we get tempted. What do people get tempted by? Money, right? What do the railroad owners want to get? Money. So look at some of the shifty, shady things that they start doing to get money off of the farmers who don't have money, but they start doing these shifty, shady things. So the railroads raised their prices for shipping and storing crops because they could. Because the farmers needed to use them. How else are they going to get their crops all the way out to Illinois? They need to use the railroad. So the railroad said, well, costs us, let's say, $2 to actually transport it. We want to make a little bit of money, right? Because that's business. So instead of charging $2.50, they say, oh, well, we were charging $2.50, and look at all the people paying it. Let's charge $3 now. Oh, they're paying $3. Let's charge $5. Whew, they're gonna pay it because they have to get their crops all the way out to Illinois. Let's charge them $10. Nothing was stopping them from raising their prices. The farmers had to pay it. They had no other way to get their crops out to Illinois. So the railroad companies, it cost them $2, and this is an example. I don't know if this is real prices, but just to give us an idea. It costs them $2. Yep, they want to make a little profit because that's normal. That's capitalism. You make a profit off of what you sell. But they keep raising it and raising it and raising it. So instead of a decent profit, now they're making a huge profit. And who's losing out? The farmers. They don't have that kind of money. Another thing they're doing. Some of the company's inspectors actually were cheating the farmers. Oh, well, when we brought your crop to the market, they weren't giving us $5 for your all the bushels of wheat that you had, they were only giving us $3. There's an extra $2 there that they pocketed. So they were outright lying, saying, yep, we only sold it for $3 when really they sold it for that $5. So the farmers are starting to figure this out. They're starting to get upset. Okay, this is not right. We need to stop this. So at the Grange, it's all these farmers getting together and they're saying, we're all losing money because of the railroads. What can we do? So we can see our key word here is regulate, to control or adjust something in order to change how it works. So the railroads, at first, had nobody regulating them. They could do whatever they wanted. They wanted to make money, so they were doing stuff to make money. The Grange helped put a stop to that. They got laws put in place. So let's hear what kind of stuff the Grange did to help the farmers.
Once again, the Grange played an important role in assisting farmers. The Grange had started out as a social and educational organization. Now, with the dispute over railroad rates for shipping goods, Grangers became active in politics. Grange members began pressuring the state legislature to regulate or control railroads. In the 1870s, the legislature passed a series of laws. The laws set maximum ticket fares and shipping rates. The laws also created the Office of Railroad Commissioner to oversee what was happening between the railroad companies and the people of Minnesota. These Granger laws signaled the beginning of railroad regulation in Minnesota.
So instead of the railroads keep raising their prices, raising their prices just to make more and more money, now there is maximums put on there. This is the standard rate. We get you want to make some money because that's what you're there for. Companies want to have some profit, but you can't go unchecked. You can't make a huge amount of profit. There was a cap put on it. You can't charge more than this. They also set up the Office of Railroad Commissioner so they could check to make sure that they're not being cheated, that what is their wheat was being sold for at market is what the farmers actually got. So things were put into place to help protect the farmers from being taken advantage of. So it was a huge thing that started here, right? So being able to have that oversight, to be able to say, no, you can't take advantage of us.
Life keeps getting faster. The years after the Civil War were a time of great change in Minnesota. Farmers were converting the vast, sod-covered prairies of southwestern Minnesota into fields of wheat, corn, oats, potatoes, and hay. Thousands of settlers were changing the land to fit their needs and their dreams. Towns and counties that hadn't even existed a few years earlier were bursting with new buildings and businesses. Trains cut through the landscape, carrying goods and passengers to and from the growing cities to the east. Both people and important industries in Minnesota were relying on this growing transportation network.
So back then, 1870s, 1880s, railroads are expanding. People are getting to the farther out parts of Minnesota. It was a big deal. Do we rely on the railroads as much today as they did back in the 1880s? How many of you have ever ridden on a train? Where did you ride on a train? Alex?
Back from Alaska.
Okay. Michael?
The train at the airport in
Okay.
Florida.
Okay. Adelaide?
Back from Alaska.
Ooh, probably the same train. Maybe. Bridget? Illinois, that's where I rode my train. Liam?
I rode from Italy and France.
Yeah, over in Europe, their train system's a little bit different than here, but I rode trains when I was in Europe too. It's an easy way to get between the countries. You forgot? Robbie?
Chicago State.
Okay. So in Chicago, Mr. Gambino's parents live in a suburb like we are here. We take the train to downtown Chicago because we don't want to deal with the traffic. and having to pay $30 to park our car to go and see stuff. We just pay for the train tickets. It's a whole lot easier. So sometimes people in today's world use the train for ease of getting around. Sometimes, like in Europe, that's the best way to get between the countries. Here, I did take the train down to see a Twins game, right? There, I know some people who use it as a commuter train because they work downtown. So they park out here where it's cheap and take the train in and just walk to work from the train station. But when I go to my dad's house in Albany, which is an hour and a half north, I don't take the train, I drive, right? In today's world, we have cars, we have planes, we have other ways to get around, so we don't rely on the train as being the best way to get around. So do we have as many trains in today's world? No. Do we still use trains? Yeah. If going through Coon Rapids, we have train tracks that come from the Iron Range up in northern Minnesota. And it hauls all of that iron ore down. So trains still are used a lot for transporting goods. You have the Amtrak that our cousin Caroline just came out from Chicago for her spring break. She took the train out here because she doesn't have a car, and it was a lot easier for her. People use the trains, just not as much as we used to, because of cars, because of planes. Adeline.
We took a train for a tour too, and a lot said that
Okay.
on the way back, we probably used the train because it was like really mountainy and there was like lots of bridges and it was like really long. It was like 5 hours.
Oh, wow. James?
I've been on a train at the airport. I didn't know that was going to be the right answer, so I just
Yep. Yep, the airport works too. So the rail trails, we had lots of trains. We saw that picture of how the railroads are going all throughout Minnesota, and we don't use it that much. People take a car when they go up to visit up north, going out to the cabins. You don't need to take the train for that. So what do we do with all of those train tracks?
So what? Rail trails. Many of the railroads that once operated in Minnesota went out of business during the mid-1900s as people came to depend on other kinds of transportation. When a railroad is abandoned and its iron rails are removed, all that's left is a rail bed, a long, narrow, and flat strip of land. Many of Minnesota's abandoned rail beds are hard to find today because trees, grasses, and other plants have grown over them. Some, however, have been put to a new use. They've been turned into bicycle trails. The Willard Munger State Trail, pictured here, is one such trail. It runs from Hinckley to Duluth along the path of what was once the St. Paul and Duluth Railroad. The trail is named in honor of former state legislator Willard Munger. Can you think of any other uses for abandoned railroad tracks?
So we've got these tracks that we don't need anymore. Sometimes they just pave them right over to make bike trails, right? I love hiking, going up to Duluth, okay? Going on, I haven't brought a bike up there, but that, I know I have some friends who do that. Beautiful area, good way to make use of that space that was all cut out. There's no trees growing there, right? They already had it cleared out for the railroads. Let's use it for something for us that we want to use now. James?
Maybe another use, like the frames that were there that make like a kind of like curve and stuff. Maybe like rainwater can go in. We can make like a little stream.
Maybe. I don't know if I've heard of streams being made from the railroad paths, because they were usually flat, whereas the streams need to be curved. But that's a good thought. Yeah. So those railroad spaces are being reused for other stuff. All right, so now let's go back to page 206 for our last question about James J. Hill. The question is, why was James J. Hill called the Empire Builder? So James J. Hill is somebody that lived during this time. If you go into St. Paul today, he has a mansion that you can take a tour of that's still present today. My kids, when they were in 4th grade at my old school, toured the James J. Hill House, which is pretty cool. So just like the Oliver Kelly farm is set up as a working farm from back in the 1870s, James J. Hill House is a mansion that still is set up as it looked when James J. Hill lived there. We are going to learn just a little bit about him and how he's an empire builder. He owned a railroad, but that's not all. He wasn't the big railroad honcho. He was a big guy in a lot of places. So he built a whole empire that covered lots of different things, not just the railroad. So as we listen to this section, you need to write all the different things that he was a part of that made him the empire builder, because he did so much.
James J. Hill. Of all the people who ran railroads in Minnesota, none was more successful or powerful than James J. Hill. He was a short, broad-shouldered man with a disability that he kept hidden from others. He was partially blind in one eye due to a boyhood bow and arrow accident. More than anything else, though, Hill was a businessman with an immense drive to get things done. He was a fierce, and some said unfair, competitor. People called him the Empire Builder. The nickname fit.
He was a fierce competitor. He went after what he wanted, and he got it, right? So he lived in a mansion. Did he have just a little bit of money? No, he had a lot of money. He built an empire. He built this massive mansion because he wanted it, and he went for it. So he had that drive. Ooh, this is what I want to do. I'm going to make it happen. But unfortunately, when people get really competitive and they really want to make that money, sometimes they're not very fair about it. They don't care that they're hurting other people as they're getting what they want, as long as they get what they want, right? And James J. Hill, what was most important to him? Taking care of his neighbors or making money? Making money, right? Sometimes when people get to that point where they make lots and lots of money, they just want more and more money. Not all the time. You will hear stories about people who give back, who they make a lot of money and they say, oh, I want to help out those who are less fortunate. James J. Hill, though, doesn't sound like he was somebody that really looked out for other people. He was looking out for himself.
Hill entered the railroad business in 1878 when he and business partners completed a rail line between the Twin Cities and Winnipeg in Manitoba, Canada. During the 1880s, he improved the existing railroad, built more tracks, and named his new company the Great Northern Railway. Hill continued to expand his holdings and eventually became one of the country's most powerful business leaders. He owned coal mines, iron mines, water power facilities, and Great Lakes steamships. He collected fine art. Additionally, he spent much time, effort, and money to expand agriculture in Minnesota and other regions served by his rail lines. Hill knew that most farmers depended on railroads to send their produce to market. So the more they produced, the more money he made.
So, did James J. Hill own a railroad? Yes. What else was a part of his massive empire? Robbie, tell me one.
Coal mines?
Coal mines. What do the coal mines use to move the coal? Harper? Trains. Right, how are we gonna get that coal to the people who need the coal? We're gonna put it on the trains. He owns the railroad. Now he's his own customer. Right, he's making sure those railroads are being used. What else did he own? Adeline? Iron mines, same thing. Oh, the iron mines need the railroads. I'm keeping myself in business. What else, Christina?
Water power facilities.
Yeah, water power facilities, because the factories use what to operate their machines? Water, right? So he's not just about the trains, He's about, oh, I need to get the coal and the iron ore to these factories. What are the factories using? They're using the water power, so I'm gonna own the water power. What else does he own? Kylie?
Steamships.
Yeah, the steamships. I own the coal and the iron ore. One way to ship it through the Great Lakes up by Duluth was on those big steamships. So he's thinking ahead. I just don't want the railroad. I want all these other things that are a part of it, that are connected, because that's the way to make more money. He was a great visionary, really seeing where the need was going to be and how he could make his money. What else was a part of his empire? Alan?
He collected art.
He collected fine art, right? So that costs money, and he could sell that art off to other people for a lot of money. So there were a lot of different things that he spread out his business in. So it wasn't just the railroad. He had a whole empire of all these different things. So with that, we are at the end of our chapter. We don't have class tomorrow. Tomorrow's the day one. So on Wednesday, we will be correcting our comprehension page. So right now, you're gonna wanna make sure that you have all of your questions answered. Even if you were gone before spring break and you missed a section, you're still responsible for working on that part. Because we will be correcting on Wednesday. When is our test? Thursday. So you can take your book home and you can start studying. Don't wait till Wednesday night to study, right? You can study tonight, you can study some tomorrow night, you can study some Wednesday night. So study a little at a time.
These are your Monday afternoon announcements. Students, if you have any tuition raffle tickets to turn into the office, please make sure you